hear a lot of people discussing psychedelics causing ego death in some description or affecting the ego, but quite often, you see, the word ego comes comes from Freud, and it's used to describe now something which is a word from other cultures. It's not an English word originally, but we've utilised the word ego to express potentially sort of what they mean. I'll put it another way. I think the word ego it's not clear what it means, and I'm not sure that people are meaning the same thing by it. So what I'm asking you really is, when you say the word ego, what is it? What do you mean? What are you indicating?
Your idea of yourself, which you've built and live by, which is given to you by what people reflect back to you.
Would that also sort of include your idea of what the world is like, or or is it just about yourself?
Well. It can, but modern egoism doesn't come with a feeling that you're one with the world. It comes with the feeling I'm separate from the world. I am a separate entity I am responsible for all my actions, type of thing. Everything I do is completely in my control. A free agent, we would call that. And and usually at birth you're given a name, and then the adults say to you, well, they should say this to you, hello, how do you do? Welcome to the world. We're playing a game, and we have some rules, and we're hoping when you grow up you can help make better rules. But for now, we have these rules, and you have to play by them. That's paraphrased from Alan Watts. He said something like that, and it's very clear. That's pretty much what we do from birth. You're told who you are, what you're doing, and then eventually you're given a potential career view by the age of 6 from school. He's going to grow up to be this, and they ask you what do you want to be when you grow up, and then you start dreaming and building your life on this persona. But it's all based on your environment and what other people have told you too. So you've created a context for yourself based on things which are not you. Objects, other people, and that's what creates your ego, basically. Do you get what I mean? But the truth is, there is no such thing as a thing, just a think. And you think things into existence by thinking and naming it something through a thought, and then you've defined something as separate from something else. Like a bee separate from a flower, let's say. But the truth is, without any bees, there wouldn't be flowers. And without flowers, there wouldn't be bees. Therefore, they are the same organism.
You're drawing an arbitrary line in the sand between a continuous experience.
Words. Yeah, using words to make a definite decision about something physical. But the problem is, you can't get wet with the word water. That's the fundamental truth about language, We believe symbols and words. We believe the map is the territory. That's the ego. That's what the ego does. It doesn't. It's very trivial and shallow in its nature.
No, it was Plato. Well, I come at it from, as I've mentioned before, the Vedic philosophy, which it defines ego as just the beliefs that a person holds.
The problem is with the ego itself is unavoidable. This is the problem. Just because you do psychedelics doesn't mean your ego disappears. You can't kill your ego at all. Maybe when you're on the drug, your ego may have temporarily disappeared.
How do you know that it's not possible to kill your ego?
You'd have to be Jesus Christ or Buddha or something. There's this idea to get to that level. Look, I'm not saying you can't have moments where your ego is gone, but to permanently live in a way where you have no ego is what in Zen Buddhism they would call you a stone Buddha. You just still. You don't do anything. You have no impact on anything anymore because you're very one and middle every way,
It seemed like, through what you're saying, in some sense, that actions are dependent on beliefs. Is that what you're saying? So, if you were possessed of no beliefs, just knowledge of like the self, and you're beyond ego, you think that would mean that, in some sense, no action would be possible?
Well, essentially, yeah, and that's why these Zen Buddhist monks sit there and do nothing.
Okay. So if I could explain the circumstances under which people have no belief in something yet still take part, would that change your mind at all?
Yes, I'm not definitive with what I've just said there. It's the positive truth. That's just something I'm saying based on my experiences. So yeah, if you can show me something like that, sure, I guess I would. I mean, I'm not saying I believe one way or the other. I can only give you words about this stuff. But go on, yeah, sure. What's your example?
Okay, well, before I go on to that, I think part of the and this is irrelevant, but it's a point of contention for me, I guess. That part of the thing of the idea that ego death would result in sort of essential death from reality or recoiling from the world in some way is, to me, strikes me as a kind of way of warning people against it. It means people won't actively pursue that because they think, well, I don't want to die. You were saying that ego death is sort of only attainable in some sense by some Jesus-like or Buddha-like characters, and
God fundamentally, you'd have to be on you'd have to be from that world to stay in that world, mate. In fact, it drives us. I mean, if you're on a DMT trip, it might be fun for the 7 minutes you're on it. But if you sit back and imagine just being there for eternity, or for as long as you're alive, you wouldn't like it. It would drive you insane.
But I suppose my first psychedelic experience was a magic mushrooms, like a psilocybin cubensis, and I took way more than I probably should have done for the first dose, and my feeling was of homecoming. I felt like that's where I was from, and I wanted to stay there forever. So my experience of psychedelics is perhaps somewhat different in the sense of that I feel, to me, there are things about that world which makes more sense to me as a entity than the world that I currently occupy, I guess. However, what I'm trying to say is separate from a discussion about psychedelics. I think it is. Maybe it's not important to a lot of people. It's important to me because I feel that the goal of ego death, or what I would describe from my perspective as eradication of all beliefs, is something which will only improve your life, will not result in inaction. It does not necessarily have to, because there are cases such as playing computer games. Now, I play Mario. I know that Mario is not a real thing. I know that world isn't real, and yet I engage in it because it's fun. I don't have to have any belief in it.
Well, when you go to watch a film, it's not real, but you suspend disbelief, don't you? Yeah, that's what you suspend the idea that it's not real and just believe it for a short while. So what you're saying, to have no beliefs is still generating some kind of belief in the world that the only way to be is to have no beliefs. So see the paradox. The paradox in trying to have no beliefs and lose your ego is that you can't do it. It's a Zen problem. There's so many koans written on this of Buddhist monks trying to send the students away to try and think about not desiring. It says, Master, the more I try and think about not to desire, the more I desire not to desire. And it's an endless loop and you cannot get out of it. The thing to realise is there is no way. It's to accept that the way is. If you get what I mean? It reverses it in itself. And in that sense, you can always flip reality back on itself. I mean, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm interrupting you. The end result of those Zen koans is not it's not failure. The end result of those stories is a realization.
Oh yeah, well, most of the time they don't even realise. Some of the students never actually come to the realisation, But
that's also true. But it's certainly possible to overcome that, wouldn't you say? I mean, it's not an impossibility. We don't know that it's impossible.
Well, no. You're right, But so you can see the problem then. It's one way or the other. You could argue it one way or the other, and both will be right and equally wrong. This is the issue with any talk of consciousness basically, which I guess is what we're talking about. You know, what am I outside of my body? This is the question, isn't it? You know, and if I am not my body and I can be in a state of the other all the time, I'd prefer to be that, is what we're saying basically in this argument. You know, so I'm trying to strive to be always on the one side, but of course life doesn't come from being on one side or the other. It comes from being both. The yin and the yang aren't fighting each other; they're swimming together. You know, it's that type of thing. The two fish, you know, whatever. So it's kind of. I don't think it's even beneficial to be in a psychedelic, egoless perspective all the time, because that's half the picture again. I've been getting all certain it's all relative, but at the same time, my paradigms can be easily shocked from looking at the complete opposite angle, that it isn't relative at all. You know, and Christianity can teach that moral relativism thing as nonsense. You know what I mean? If you want to feel what it means to know good and evil, then research the Bible. Do you know what I mean? Because it goes deep into that concept of good and evil. But if you don't want to accept good and evil and you want to see it as all relative and something else, that's okay too, and that can be equally proved as well by going down the other route. But of course, one can't define itself without the other at the same time. So it's still a part of the story. Sorry?
But in the end, they're both filters on the world, right? They're both filters on the world. They're both metaphors.
Exactly, but they both seem to go back to the same thing, but talk about the same thing in terms of opposites.
Well, I don't know. This is how it seems to me, that from within, say, the Christian perspective of good and evil, that's how you perceive the world, because you've taken that on as a filter. And if you go through this sort of moral relativism perspective, then you see things through that filter, because you're still viewing on both sides. You're still viewing through the filter of belief, essentially. Knowing that is a filter, knowing that it's preventing you from being able to perceive the world as it really genuinely is. Surely the next step is to decide to do something about that and stop believing.